Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. So today I'm going to talk about When the Body Says No by Gabor Mate. So if that name sounds familiar to you, Gabor Mate, he's a psychologist, I believe, but he actually became famous with this book. I don't want to say famous, he became more well known because of this book. But if the name sounds familiar to you, it's because he recently did an interview with Prince Harry where they talk about like trauma and I don't know. I didn't see the interview, but I know that that's kind of what's circulating around social media right now because obviously Prince Harry and all the controversy, with him and his wife and his family is sort of like the big thing right now. So I did talk in another video about his most recent book called The Myth of Normal. So you'll also be getting a sort of review. I don't really consider these book reviews because I'm not going through the whole text of the book. I mostly talk about whether I would recommend that you read the book. And because my channel is mostly dedicated to chronic illness, the books that I talk about have some kind of chronic illness type of slant to them. So I talk about that and whether I would recommend this book for anybody that is chronically ill. So this was a book that was recommended to me by my psychologist. It took me a while. I couldn't find a hard copy of it. That was one issue because I can't read off of like a phone or a Kindle or whatever. And I'm very resistant to audiobooks because I feel like I don't absorb the information as well. But I was able to get it for free through Audible. The book is really expensive wherever you can find it. Could not find a copy at the library. And so I was able to just, get a free copy through Audible. And so I was like, well, why not? And I'm kind of glad because it did not live up to whatever expectations I had of it. My therapist recommended it. Gabor Mate is really known for his like mind body connection type of work. And I do have an issue with this, as most of us who are chronically ill have issues with that because it insinuates that it has that vibe of it's all in your head, which is not what he is saying, but it does give off that vibe sometimes. And so I was kind of resistant to reading the book because I was like, oh, I don't want to, I hate that theory that it's all in your head or that your mind and your stressors are what's causing your illness or contributing to illness. Yes, it is contributing to illness, but many of us acquired our illnesses or developed our illnesses. For example, people with long COVID, they got it from COVID. You know what I mean? There's an actual thing that happened that made them sick. But anyways, I was like, given the fact that a lot of the therapies that I've tried over the years have failed or have not given the results that my doctor and I were expecting, I decided to start diving into this because yes, there is, I guess, trauma or childhood, issues, I don't know, that may be unresolved, or I don't know. I was like, let's just read the book and see. So I don't have like a lot of specifics because like I said, it's an audiobook that I was listening to. So I don't have specifically like, I can't pull something out of the book because I don't have the book. But he does have a lot of good anecdotes. That's one thing that I do like about his writing is that he does provide stories. Like he'll talk about like, oh, Mary was, only 15 years old when something happened to her. And then, now she's, diabetic or whatever. He does give you good stories like that. And he is pretty good at making that connection between, this happened to her as a child. Now she's an adult and she has all these issues, physical and psychological. And this is why. You know what I mean? He is also very good at presenting the science. And this book was full of a lot of that, like a lot of medical, when you suffer a trauma or a stressor as a child, it affects such and such hormones, your cortisol, your, hippocampus, whatever. There is a lot of medical terminology and science in this book. And that was not something that I was expecting. I kind of had the, this is a self-help type of book vibe, because I mean, my therapist was recommending it, and I'm not a doctor or a psychologist. So a lot of that terminology and a lot of the science is kind of lost on me. And really, I don't care because I'm sick. I don't need to know the science. I need to know what I can do, right? What I can do to ease my suffering and ease my pain. But there is a lot of that. So if you're very interested in the science and in knowing what hormones are triggered, what parts of the brain are affected with certain traumas or problems that you've had in your past, this book would be good for that, and especially if you understand that kind of stuff. But there was a lot of that, and I really wasn't expecting that. I do like the stories, though, because the stories tend to make it more accessible and easier to understand. So I'm trying to see what else here. It does seem a bit, I want to say, I don't know what the word is, uppity, very scientific, very, it can feel like it's not very accessible. Like it's almost like this book that's exclusive for, psychologists or doctors. And so that obviously I didn't like because I couldn't really understand. And like I said, I don't care about that. I care about what I can do, what I can understand in order to help my specific situation. Now, I feel like these books, maybe because I was born at a time when a lot of this science had already come out or was developing or it was coming out, but I feel like he's stating the obvious. Yes, if you are beaten as a child, it's going to affect you as an adult. You're going to have a lot of issues as an adult. It's cause and effect, right? So to me, it's almost like it's very obvious, right? If I had if I was in a traumatic car accident as a child, I survived and my parent died, yes, I'm going to grow up with a lot of issues because of that. So it does feel like he's stating the obvious. The different thing that he does in his book is that he connects it to physical illness. So he connects it to, even cancers, which, I'll talk about my discomfort with that later on in this review. But he does do a pretty good job in connecting those early traumas or anything that happened to you to a physical ailment later on in your life. So he does talk about personality types. That was very interesting to me too, is that there are certain personality types. I don't know how true it is. It might just be a connection that he's made in his time as a psychologist. But there's like a personality type, I don't want to say that's prone to ALS, but that is found in ALS patients. There's a personality type that is found in cancer patients. And he describes those personality types. Again, I don't have the specific names because I don't remember. It's almost like I just have a vague recollection of the book because I was listening to it and not actually reading it. But there are personality types. So for example, people with ALS tend to be very, very nice. And they tend to be like, like, don't worry about me, or they don't like to be a burden on other people. And he says that he's consistently seen that personality type in people that have ALS. And then he talks about Stephen Hawking, who didn't fit that personality type and ended up living a really long time with ALS. So I don't know if he's finding, like, how can I say it? He's looking for it and he's going to find it, right? I feel almost like he's making these connections because that's what he believes. But he says that in his work with these people with these specific illnesses, he always sees that same personality type. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think it is more of when you hold things in, it can make you sick. Right? Somebody who's overly nice is always thinking about everyone else. They never put themselves first, and they tend to neglect themselves, and then that can result in illness. So I don't know if it's necessarily a personality type or if it's just people that ignore themselves and then, they end up developing these illnesses. But he claims that there are personality types even with cancer patients. So that's kind of where, again, that mental, that sort of, I don't want to say it's all in your head. He does talk about how he isn't saying that you caused your illness or that you did this to yourself, right? He says, I'm not saying that. I'm not, you know, telling people that their personality or who they are made them sick. Because obviously your personality is formed, you know, in your childhood based on your experiences that you've had within your family. Your personality is based on that. So if you had a parent that was very self-absorbed and you were always having to put them first before yourself, you're going to have that personality throughout your life of always putting everybody else first, and that could lead you to ALS. Like, that kind of connection is what he's making. But, you know, I really think that he really, really, really believes this stuff. And that's when you read his books, you know, because I read The Myth of Normal in this one, he really feels that this is the root of illness, right? He really, really feels like childhood trauma and, you know, whether it's abuse or whether it's an accident or some kind of traumatic event, that is the root of illness. Like, you really, really get this vibe that he truly believes that this is the absolute root of illness. And if there's something that I've learned in the many years of my illness, is that every medical professional, you know, a hematologist is going to say it's your blood, an endocrinologist is going to say it's your hormones, a psychologist is going to say it's your mind, trauma, whatever. Every profession feels that that's kind of like whatever they know is like the root of illness. And he's really digs into it, like, this is the root of illness. As somebody that's been diagnosed with Lyme disease, and many of you out there that are now struggling with long COVID, it's going to be difficult to sort of wrap yourself around his theories, because we acquired our illnesses. We literally got it from something. Well, I'm not saying that he's wrong. You know, maybe our personality types or our early traumas could have made us more vulnerable to developing long COVID or, you know, chronic Lyme disease or whatever, because they do increase inflammation in your body. I know that people are going to struggle with what he's claiming in his books. And I do think that he has a serious blind spot there. He does acknowledge, that, you know, illness is a sort of happens from a lot of different things, not just trauma. It does happen from, like, I guess, environmental things or whatever. But, you know, you really, really get this vibe that he truly, truly believes that all trauma and all, like, illness comes from some kind of trauma or some kind of experience that you've had in your life. And that is the issue. And I do talk about this in my other review of his other book, is that he does a very, very good job in making those connections scientifically, you know, by giving you stories and all of that. He does a great job making those connections. And yeah, I do think that he is right to a certain extent. But he doesn't do a great job of providing solutions or saying, you know, this is what can be done. I mean, you can't go back in time and change your childhood. And so the vibe that I get is that these things happen to you. It's not your fault, because if you have an abusive parent or if you got into a car accident or whatever, it was something that happened to you. You had nothing to do with that. So it does give you this sense of helplessness, because you can't go back in time and change that. As an adult, you can get therapy and you can try to work through those issues. But again, he's not really telling you how you can do that. Or he's not really telling you, you know, this is how you get through. There's basically, it's not like you can reverse your illness by dealing with your trauma. I'm not getting that vibe from his writings. He does talk about, and I mentioned this in my other video, he talks about people healing, right? He talks about healing. So you get to that chapter and you go, okay, that, like, now we're going to get to the good stuff, right? Now we're going to learn how to heal mentally, and hopefully that will trickle down to my physical illness and help me heal physically. He talks about healing, and he does present this concept, a concept that many of us in the chronic illness world are familiar with, which is spontaneous remission, right? Some people went to therapy, or they started to deal with their trauma or to deal with whatever issues they hadn't dealt with before, and spontaneously they went into remission. And he does present this story. I'm not sure if it's in this book or the other book, but it's in one of these books. He presents a story of a lady that had cancer and was basically like terminal. And they told her she was terminal, or they told her that if she didn't receive chemotherapy or something, that it was just, she was going to die. And she refused all treatment. She said, I know I'm not going to die. I know the cancer is going to go away. Like, it was just this bizarre story that he presented. And the doctors were like, if you don't get chemotherapy, if you do not get this treatment, the cancer is going to spread and it's going to die. And then I think she went to a follow-up. The cancer did spread a little bit, and they told her, look, it's happening. We're telling you the cancer is going to spread and you're going to die. And she's like, no. She's like, I know I'm not going to die. I know that the cancer will eventually go away. And I don't know what she was doing. I don't know if she was like doing some kind of like positive thinking. I forget, because I don't, like I said, I don't have a copy of the book. I would have definitely put a bookmark in that story, because it was really out there. And I don't know if she was the one. There was one lady in the book that she would like every day tell herself like a part of her body that she liked. Like, oh, my hands. I like my hands because they're so smooth, or I like my eyes because they're so round, or whatever. I don't know if it was that same lady, but there was something in there like that. This lady was doing something, and she just said, like, I know I'm not going to die. And her cancer, like a while later, she went back to the doctors, and her cancer spontaneously like disappeared or something. Stories like that are a great disservice to a lot of us who are sick. But I felt like that story was, because he gave a couple of stories like that, I felt like that story was sort of to hook people, because then he talks about like, oh, that's not necessarily healing. That's not, you can heal in many different ways. And so he talks about other people that had like terminal illnesses that simply made peace with their trauma, whoever abused them, or whatever horrible thing happened to them in childhood, they made peace with that, and then they died. So I felt like he almost presented it like, here's the path to wellness. Here's what you can do in order to heal yourself from the inside out. And then he talks about how like, well, you just make peace with it. That way you can at least die peacefully. You know what? It's just, it felt very misleading. And it sort of gives me, because we've heard this from other people. I remember I used to live in an apartment when I was married, and there was this lady that would tell me, you just got to pray the Lyme away. It gives that vibe of, if I just pray, it'll eventually go away. Or if I go on a pilgrimage to some, holy site, I'll go there and I'll be healed, right? It does have that weird kind of, I don't know what the word is. It just has this like miraculous, a miracle vibe type of situation. And, presenting those types of ideas is very dangerous, because again, there are people, and I have heard stories in real life of people that will forego cancer treatment because they heard of some holistic doctor in Mexico, or they, they're going to try colonics, and the cancer ends up spreading. And the doctors are like, look, your cancer is spreading. If you don't do this, you're going to end up dying, or you're going to get to a point where we can't treat the cancer, or we're going to need to pursue a more aggressive treatment. Yes, in this weird case that he writes in his book, this lady had enough faith that I guess it went away. But that's not the case most of the time. And I feel like presenting these ideas is very dangerous. He has come under fire, him and Prince Harry, with this interview that they did, because they talk about psychedelics. I don't think he talks about them in this book, but he does talk about them in The Myth of Normal. And I do feel that, Gabor Mate has a very woo-woo kind of hippie vibe. Or he's developing more of that kind of a vibe. And presenting these concepts can be dangerous. It's not safe for everyone. I know that if I did psychedelics, it probably wouldn't go well because everybody's immune system is different. He's not really considering, again, those of us who acquired conditions. We can't do all that other stuff. He's basically talking about people that are otherwise healthy, yet this trauma or whatever caused these issues. But like I said, he really, really believes that this is the truth, that this is the root of all illness. Because he doesn't just talk about autoimmune illnesses. I mean, he talks about cancers, rheumatoid arthritis. There was a lady with some kind of a skin, like a skin condition that like makes you immobile over time. And she also was able to get rid of her illness. And he presents those stories like, at the beginning. I don't know if it was, I'm mixing up the two books, but he does present a lot of these stories like at the beginning of somebody that, she just went to therapy or started doing other things and this illness just slowly went away. So it is frustrating because many of us who have chronic conditions have dealt with this kind of stuff from therapists, from doctors telling us, you're just stressed out. It's become a cop-out for a lot of doctors, basically. And this guy has made it into like his life's work. So yeah, it did give a sort of bleak feeling by the time you get to the end of the book, and he hasn't really presented any ideas or anything like, here's how you can help yourself, or here are things that you can do on your own, or here's how you can work with your therapist. It's just like, these are the stories. Trauma can definitely cause illness, but it's not it just doesn't seem like it's reversible. There's, he doesn't say it's reversible. He doesn't say you can get back to physical health by healing the mental component. So it very much feels bleak in a way. You can present a concept all you want, and I'm not saying that he's lying. This is very much true. And even after reading his books, I saw that I had a lot of those personality traits that could have contributed to my developing a chronic illness. But what can you do about it? That's, I feel like psychologists are very much that way. I'm drowning and you're describing the water. You're not telling me how to get out of the water or what I can do to survive in the water. And yeah, it is a good book if you are interested in learning about that connection. It's not a great book if you're interested in resolving that issue, or dealing with your trauma. So yeah, for stuff like that, I have other books like the DBT therapy workbook that it'll be here also on this playlist, the playlist called Book Reviews. And that one is really good. I think that actually gives you the tools that you need in order to deal with a sense of hopelessness, despair, that kind of thing, things that come with a chronic or even a terminal illness. Yeah, I don't know. I was really let down by this guy. I really, he's been so front and center on social media and all over the place. And I really feel like he's presenting concepts that I think are popular right now. But just because a concept is popular doesn't mean... And I think the reason this concept is popular is because it takes accountability off of you. You can blame someone else for the trauma. Oh, I was abused, or I had this accident, or whatever. And it can easily fit a victimhood narrative. So I don't, I do see that disconnect there. He's not really telling you what you can do. He's telling you, well, this is what happened to you. It happened to you. You didn't do it to yourself. It's like, well, that's great, but now I have to fix it, unfortunately. Right? So anyways, between this book and The Myth of Normal, I would recommend When the Body Says No, because it's more specific to illness. But if you want something that is not as specific to illness and more, much broader, then I would go with The Myth of Normal. But either way, I feel like his books did not really help. So anyways, thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.